All right. Welcome to the APA's Women in Planning Division Book Club. My name is Michelle Catapodis, and I'm the Director of Programs. Tonight, we are honored to be joined by Mary Means, author of this month's book club selection, her memoir, Something Worth Saving, about her own life and the beginnings of the Main Street movement. Let's start with a bit about Mary's background. Mary Means led the team that launched the Main Street movement from a risky 3-community pilot in the late 1970s to a 6-state, 30 communities expansion in the early 1980s. The pioneering preservation-based revitalization strategies she and her team developed are now central to Main Street programs, thriving in 44 states, a network now known as Main Street America. Today, active Main Street organizations assure town center vitality in more than 1,600 small towns and commercial corridors across the country. Now retired for 35 plus years, her small but mighty planning firm, Mary Means and Associates, helped communities and other public interest organizations create strategic plans with wide public support, sparking momentum that overcame inertia. From heritage tourism strategies to neighborhood revitalization plans to vision-driven downtown plans, Mary's work has been recognized with numerous state and national awards. In 2019, the American Planning Association honored her with its National Planning Pioneer Award. And in 2020, the National Trust for Historic Preservation gave her Crown and Shield Award, the highest honor in historic preservation. Main Street Americans Leadership Award is named for her. A native of Atlanta, Mary is a graduate of Michigan State University and the University of Delaware. She was a Loeb Fellow at Harvard University Graduate School of Design. Her book on the origins of the Main Street movement, Main Street's Comeback and How It Can Come Back Again, was released during the pandemic. 5 years later, her memoir, Something Worth Saving, is now out in both print and audio formats. So first, housekeeping, how this session is going to work. We'll have about an hour. We'll kick it off by having Mary read a little bit from her new memoir. Then I'll ask a few questions that I had when I was reading the book that I think will connect with many women planners. So I'm going to welcome Mary and welcome all of you.
Thank you very much, Michelle and Linda and Beth and Sarah. And Sarah's a note taker. I don't think she's human, but maybe she is. And Carrie, all of you. It's very good to be with all of you. And there's a side of me that wishes I was in Detroit with you coming up very soon. But since I just got back from Main Street America's National Conference in Tulsa, all I need is another high energy conference right now. So hope you guys knock yourselves out and have a wonderful time. I think I want to read for you a little bit from like the opening of the book, and it kind of explains, let me explain the title for a minute. I grew up in Atlanta, and my dad was a classical architect, meaning he didn't really think there'd been any decent design done since about 1840. And he's dead serious about this. So when I landed a job at age 27 to go to Chicago and open the Midwest office, a new office for a 10-state region for the National Trust for Historic Preservation, you can imagine I was really excited calling Dad and saying, guess what? I'm so excited. I've been selected to do this and put in charge of selling preservation and helping people in 10 states in the Midwest. And my father says, but sweetie, there's nothing worth saving out there. So I was taken aback for a second, but then I thought, yes, there is, and I'm going to show you. And I guess I did. He came around later, but when it came to creating a title for this, I thought Something Worth Saving applied to me as well as all the buildings. So here we go. I'll start with the beginning. The chapter is called Smile. I don't remember smiling when I learned my brother would die, but I didn't have to. My mother remembered it for me. Even now, I can recall everything else about that day like it was just this morning. Cool air wafted from the open fridge, soothing my flushed face. The Georgia heat was sweltering out where Jimmy, Sarah, and I were building a treehouse in the spreading mulberry tree near the alley. I'd run inside for ice water, but it wasn't much cooler indoors. Mom was starting dinner at the stove. the clattering ceiling fan her only relief. She'd rolled up the sleeves of her house dress nearly to her shoulders. I gulped down a glass and headed back out. Wait, she said. I need to talk with you. I stopped at the screen door. Her words hung in the air as I turned to her. A trickle of sweat ran down her neck, and I noticed that her face looked different, red-eyed and swollen. Something was wrong. The lump on Jimmy's back is malignant. Seeing my puzzled look, she continued, her voice breaking. Dr. Adams called. It's cancer. It's rhabdomyosarcoma. I understood the cancer part. Mom's lip quivered. The prognosis is not good. She moved away from the stove to lean on the counter by the sink and wiped her puffy face with a dish towel. Neither of us said anything for a minute. I just stood by the fridge. I could still hear Sarah and Jimmy hammering out by the treehouse. Finally, I asked, what's a prognosis? It means he may die. She was crying now. I'd never seen Mom cry before, not even the time she dropped the iced tea jug on her toe. I didn't know what to do, so I just stood there, a twinge forming in my tummy. Daddy and I have decided not to tell him. She looked out the window over the sink, out to where they were hammering. He's too little to know. It may turn out okay, so we don't want to scare him. I nodded, still unsure what to say. You're the oldest. I need you to keep it a secret. I was 10 years old. Mom reached for a paper towel, blew her nose, and turned back to me. When grown-ups are talking about it near him, I need you to distract him, to keep him from hearing. I need you to protect him when he's roughhousing with his friends. I need your help holding this all together, Mary Catherine. When she used my full name instead of MC, something was coming. She was so serious, so upset. He's going to have an operation and he'll need to heal. I nodded okay, finished my cool water, and ran back up to the treehouse. Mom was upset, but Jimmy wasn't going to die. Old people died, and Jimmy was only 8. I don't know if I remember smiling. Mom told me so often I smiled when she told me Jimmy had cancer. Is it possible that I did? Or does the ghost of that memory linger only because she said it so many times, throwing it at me like a weapon for years after, whenever she wanted to hurt me? But when I look back at that day now, I wonder if I did smile. I wonder if it was nervousness, or more likely, if I'd been proud of myself for being such a big girl that I could be trusted. I didn't understand words like prognosis, but I knew Mom had told me a big secret. She'd asked me to help her. Responsibility had settled over my shoulders in that moment, a cloak I did not yet realize I would wear for a long time. She must love me, I thought. She must trust me a lot to tell me. Jimmy can't know, and Sarah can't either. She's too young. But me, she knows I can help hold everything and everyone together. That thought pleased me. That thought made me smile. I couldn't have known then how she would interpret it. That's how it opens.
Thank you for sharing that. And before we go on to the first question, I forgot to add that we'll be in this conversation for about a half hour, and then we'll move into the Q&A. But if you have any questions in the meantime, if you can put them in the chat, and then we'll answer questions once we're done with these initial questions that we'll go through. So, all right. So since the title of your memoir is Something Worth Saving, I want to ask you about your own thinking. What makes something worth saving? And also curious whether your thinking on this has changed. Tell us about the title Something Worth Saving, and how did you choose it?
Well, I explained that a little bit. I got ahead of us in our order of our
Mhm.
preparation for this. So you know that I called it that because my father had,
Mhm.
in effect, was very sad when I landed this amazing job at age 27. But let's go back to your question about what is something worth saving, and how has it changed? I grew up in Atlanta. My dad insisted that we take our vacations in places like Charleston, Savannah, New Orleans. My mom insisted that they be places that were near a beach or something that kids would enjoy. But I saw an awful lot of historic houses and an awful lot of historic environments. And I guess I really developed something of an affinity for it. So after college and while I was in grad school, I started in Philadelphia writing National Register nominations. And I fell in love with historic preservation. It just kind of, I want to say it enabled me to take my passion for history and meld it to activism because the bulldozers were working really fast, federal bulldozers, and things were coming down, and I could do something about it if I went into preservation. At the time, though, back to your what's worth saving, I think most of the people in the preservation movement, particularly the National Trust and others, thought of it as fine buildings that should be restored and should be restored in a very accurate way. Um, and it was really, we hadn't even started historic districts much before then. So a lot of it was just particular and doing things perfectly with these buildings. Um, I sometimes recently think of it as a curator would uh, conserve a fine painting was kind of the mindset in the preservation field about how we should treat these fine buildings. If it had no visual interest, yet something incredible had happened there, that kind of took a back seat because we really weren't researching it. We were trying to get stuff nominated on the register. So when I got to the Midwest with this in my head, as we're looking for these fine examples, and my job is to sell people on treating them with great deal of respect and care, I was finding that as I drove around the Midwest and met with officials and professionals and activists, that that wasn't selling in the Midwest. It was kind of like, we don't have stuff that's historic here. This was the early 1970s. And Boston and Charleston are historic, but we here in the middle of Illinois, that's not for us. And I could also hear them, a little thought bubble above their head. Does she have any idea how expensive this is? That is ridiculous. We can't do that. So more and more, I began to realize that uh, what we were trying to sell wasn't selling, and that we really needed to be able to reach people who had the power to do something about it. And they tended to be men, and they tended to be business people in the center of town, the town center. Um, and when I saw the breadth of fine buildings that were all over the place, the main street, or the main street, because it's always called that, all over the Midwest was just lined with beautiful, beautifully scaled buildings that were not doing well. And I realized that if we were going to do anything about this, we were going to have to find a way for these buildings to earn their keep. It wasn't going to be enough to just say, you've got to restore this. Um, so my mindset began to change in the 70s with this is an elitist thing that is not going over. We need to find a way to broaden the message. And when I really accidentally learned about, and my mind changed on it, was when we decided to undertake this project to create some materials and case studies of ways to keep these town centers going. I almost accidentally called it the Main Street Project because the streets were named Main Street. And what was amazing was it took off in the media just like that. It's like I had not realized that Main Street touches something in the human heart. It touches somehow a sense of wanting, a longing to be connected and a place that you gather and all of that. And I guess over the course of the many years now that have passed since we were doing the original work, I've really come to think that a lot of what is worth saving now is places associated with story, the stories of us, the stories that are good stories, not so good of times, but it's it would enable us to be it does enable us to tell the story of many generations of many different kinds of people, some of whom have gotten along well and others have not. And the story associated with some of these structures and buildings and districts is every bit as important as the Italianate cornice. So mine has shifted, I think, to a more human scaled and human accessible. And I think it's also one of the reasons that the Main Street Project took off like gangbusters. It was because we were being practical about it. People would say, you know, how is my building gonna, how am I gonna make, how's my business gonna make enough for me to stay in business? That was concerning them. And that's what we had to deal with and what we did. We sort of worked on the how can we keep these buildings standing by having them earn their keep and sort of approach preservation. We approached it laterally rather than head on. And I think it really took force.
Great. Thank you. Okay, the next.
If these answers, Michelle, get too long-winded, wave at me or something. So,
Okay.
and I'll wrap it up.
All right. So you kept several secrets for many years. Can you share some of them and the impact this has had on you?
Well, I think I've had many, many years of therapy, and a lot of it started in deep childhood. But my parents, needless to say, broke up shortly after my brother died. My mother was absolutely devastated. She never really recovered. My father was not a very emotional man. Um, and he was, you could say he was really not there for her. And the family broke up shortly after that. I was about 12 or so when my father left. And my mother, as in my tween years, my mother would say, well, other women don't, they say terrible things about their ex-husbands, but I don't want to do that. But your father, and then finish the sentence. And one day, I was ironing for her, and over in the corner of the kitchen, she just said, "You know, Dad, your father is a homosexual." And I was, "What?" "Oh, yeah, I found some letters." Well, this happened about a month after we'd been at church, an Episcopal church, several times in a row. I looked over, and during coffee hour, I'd seen a woman on the other side of the room. Everybody's clustered in this side, and there's someone out here like a little satellite. And she seemed very composed. She was dressed in a very severe, I thought she was a man at first, severe haircut and severe clothes, and sipping her coffee. And I asked my mom, what's with her? And my mother said, she's a lesbian. They are really despised and they have to live in back alleys. And I had already suspected that I was a lesbian. And now that I knew my father was gay, that proved it because I mean, I was 12, 13 years old because I was, it had to be genetic. I learned a lot later. But I guess my point is that I kept this secret um, until I was in my early 40s. I lived as a closeted lesbian. I had relationships with men, but the real attraction was, and I was in a couple of longer term partnerships. But it wasn't until I was in my really close to 40 that I had the confidence and all to come out. Someone in another of these book club events said, what was it like to be a lesbian planner in the 70s? And my reply was, there weren't any lesbian planners in the 70s. There were a lot of us who were, I'm sure there were a lot of us, but I could not have done I wouldn't have had a job and I couldn't have done what I've been doing with my life if it had been known at all. So eternally, there was this tension of keeping that secret and moving ahead with life. So that was one of those secrets. And the other, of course, that my father, who was a very, very well respected architect in Atlanta, who would have had a very similar experience had it been known that he was gay. It was just something you didn't really talk about. but it
Yeah,
most definitely shaped me.
yeah. You mentioned as a teenager, so another question kind of around that same time. So as a teenager, you had experiences that, as you look back, shaped you becoming a community planner. Can you tell us about them?
Yeah, I think it's one that I didn't realize until I was writing the memoir as it was coming together. And if you try this, sometimes it's amazing how you think you've got the constellation of your life moments memorized. They're there. And then all of a sudden the dots shift and they take a different pattern. And that's kind of what happened. Shortly after my brother died, we were very, very broke. Dad didn't have much work at all. And he came home one day and said, I bought us a house. My mother freaked out because we couldn't afford one. She didn't know we were looking for one. So we went up to see it, and it was the last house on a dead end street. It dead ended at the um, chasm that was to become I-75. I-75 was blasting into Atlanta, and they had a big slope that was beyond where our street ended. And of course, on the other side of this canyon was the other remains of that street, which had been called Old Bolton Road. Our house was the last one here. And our house was a shack, virtually. It was framed. Uh, my father, they could turn the interior into Colonial Williamsburg, which he did with scraps from jobs and things like that. But it always seemed a little odd. Now, on the other side of this uh, canyon were the rest of the people who had lived in this neighborhood. It Atlanta and a lot of southern cities have had a small cluster of an African American neighborhood, generally people who worked in estates nearby. And that's what this was. And it had been there for a couple of generations, probably. And on the other side of the canyon, the street continued, and there were 8 or 10 houses. And because I could crawl under the fence and I-75 hadn't been paved yet, um, I could get to school much faster walking to school and coming out on the other side than taking the school bus. It was an hour and a half really on the school bus or a 20-minute walk otherwise. So just about every day I would be coming back and forth in this odd neighborhood that was these people who looked at me and I looked at the ground because it was very uncomfortable. And I got to thinking, and I thought about this as I was writing it. Our street address was Margaret Mitchell Drive. In its wisdom, the city had decided to name Old Bolton Road Margaret Mitchell Drive. So here these folks living in isolation, they come along and plow out 4 or 5 houses probably, leave ours on one side, and then rename so their address is Margaret Mitchell Drive as well. And I'll let you remind you that Margaret Mitchell wrote Gone with the Wind, and she's kind of an Atlanta icon because of that. So I think early on, what was formed in me is these are people who have roots here, they have families here, and this is just arbitrarily broken their neighborhood in pieces. And I could see that they lived a very different way than we did on our side of the street. Um, so I think going to my father's job sites with very wealthy people and these very fine houses that he was building, and then walking to school along Margaret Mitchell Drive did a lot for kind of subtly saying, I personally see what large scale destruction, mindless destruction can do to, particularly to um, fragile communities that don't have the political power. They certainly didn't put interstate highways through the wealthy people's neighborhoods. So yeah, I picked up a lot of it right there.
Yeah. So it's been said that writing a memoir is an emotional roller coaster. Yours is particularly candid. What motivated you to do it, and who is your ideal reader?
Well, I think all of you on this call or at this club meeting are among my ideal readers. What motivated me? Well, I started out once I was winning these awards, APA's award and the National Trust Award. I thought it's time for me to really write about the beginnings of Main Street, how it all got going. So I put it together, and got my best friend to read the manuscript. And she came back to me and said, "This is wonderful, except I can't quite tell if you're wanting it to be a narrative or a memoir, because it's kind of both right now. And I went, that's why I'm so confused trying to write it. I'll pull them apart, I'll write a narrative, and then I'll write the memoir. And I'm looking beyond you there, and I see, because most of your books are spine out, but one of them is not. That's my book just behind you, Main Street's Comeback, and How It Can Come Back Again. Um, so then I started working on the memoir. And one of the major reasons I undertook it was a number of friends had said, you've had such an extraordinary life and struggles and all, you really should write a memoir. And several said it could really help women in particular who have gone through things at work, relationships, all of that. And it would help if they would find it, we think, very interesting. The folks did. So I did. I undertook the memoir. And whoever said it's fasten your seatbelt, it's an emotional journey, they weren't kidding. It really was. It surfaced a lot of things in the course of it. It took me about 3 years to write it, working a couple of 3 hours a day. Um, and it was an amazing experience. I learned so much about myself in the course of doing it. And I will have to say that the response, um, particularly from my ideal readers, women, some men, who are sort of in the middle of their professional lives and are bumping up against things or are finding that they're encountering misogyny daily, um, or whatever, or are in relationships that are very difficult, but you have so little self-confidence that you kind of can't quite say, I better leave this and go on. The response to it has really been wonderful. I've had amazing letters from people saying, my favorite one was, reading this enabled me to have a really tough conversation with my mother. So, yeah, that's what motivated me.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, your memoir is a really honest look at your own life and the Main Street movement you've created. There's vulnerability in leadership here. This is something you talk a lot about, what it looks like for yourself and others. Can you tell us about how you first learned to be vulnerable at work? There's a lot of struggle in there and a lot of finding your footing through trial and error because it's something that a lot of us find really scary. Does it get any easier?
Uh, it gets easier to be vulnerable when you get older, uh, particularly when you reach my age, because as someone said, how could you be this open and honest? And I said, well, you get to be my age, and what do I have to lose? It's might as well do it. But at the time, it can be incredibly painful. I think the thing that I really found difficult, and in talking conversations with people about the memoir, I found that it really resonated, is we tend to wear a professional mask when we're with our professional colleagues and in public. Uh, and when we go home, most often we take that mask off. Um, and that's when we are, in other words, at work, it's the same person underneath, but you feel, I really have to act professionally. I can't bring the fact that my child is desperately ill, or my parents are in a hospital, or my marriage is breaking up, any of that. You sort of feel like if I do that, I think particularly women, um, I'm going to be labeled hysterical, or she's just kind of too soft to be the leader that we need her to be. Um, and I certainly went through a lot of that. I think one of the things that powered me through it, um, was that I had a passion for what we were doing with this Main Street thing. And I could tell from the response it was getting from well beyond the Midwest and well beyond the small universe of preservation. The response it was getting, um, said to me, what we're doing is way more important than historic preservation. It is it's going to be helping communities all over the country, and it's desperately needed because we're losing the centers to shopping centers and all of that. So I think in a way the passion and commitment of it, um, made something of a bulldozer of me. That's ironic, isn't it, in preservation? But I had to plow through a lot of uh, well, I'm going to say just not under people who didn't understand who were my bosses. Um, I also was having to deal with, I can remember that when I was about to hire my first person in the Midwest, and my boss at the National Trust said to me, well, you can't hire another woman because I don't want an all-woman office, and you can't hire anyone who's gay. And I just I just said, Russell, with what we pay, what's left? You tell me what's left. So we went on with it, but I knew that this was the thing that I was most concerned about people finding out because it would have ended everything. Um, and I guess I don't know where it came from me that I finally decided to be vulnerable. It was definitely after I was winding up my professional life that I really became a lot. I've always been open with friends, um, but not like really writing from the heart and writing with deep emotion about what was really going on inside. I know he wasn't one of my ideal readers, but I guess he is. There's a very well-known planner who heads a major city planning commission, has a very politically fraught job. And we were having lunch one day, and he said, what are you writing about?" And I told him I started with the mask thing. You wear one, I wear one, and yet we're falling apart inside. And that's what I'm writing about is the falling apart inside and still going ahead and performing wonderfully on the outside. And he just was rapt as I was telling him this. And then he said, I really, really want to read this book, so finish it. Um, so, yeah, I think it does really resonate with people.
Mhm.
Um, and maybe one of the reasons is I decided I didn't want it to be a memoir that was, and then I did this, and then I met this famous person, and then I went here. I really wanted it to be what's going on inside. Um, And I actually give you a moment when I knew I could do that, that I could be that vulnerable. Um, it was 2020, and it was the first national Main Street conference that was being held on Zoom. And I was asked to close it. And they said, these folks, the local Main Street managers, remember everything closed down in the spring of 2020. And I don't know about you, but I think everyone was terrified because we had no idea what it was, how dangerous it was to our health, when everything was going to reopen. We all knew it was an economic disaster. And all of these Main Street folks had been dealing with that in their localities for the whole summer. And so she just said, please inspire them. So I thought pretty long and hard about what I would do, how I would do that, and how I would feel if I were in their shoes. I would have known everyone in the town, and they'd all be coming to me with, "What are we going to do? What are we going to do?" And I'd be terrified because I didn't know. Um, so I decided that I would have a conversation with him that essentially was saying, "I know what you've been going through because I went through it every day of my life. I continue to go through it. There's this voice that says, I'm going to be found out for the fraud I really am. I don't know what I'm doing. And despite all of my achievements and awards and everything, I still believed that at some point I was not worthy of this and I was living a behind a screen. And it was fascinating because they taped this 8-minute talk a week or so ahead. And that meant that I could sit at home and watch myself give it. And I could also watch the chat. And the chat just filled up with, oh my God, she's being so vulnerable. I can't believe I feel just like this. And it just went on and on. And I sat there in tears. Many of them were in tears also. But I realized at that moment, not only can I be vulnerable in this book, I really have to. I really need to be for the readers who really feel this way all the time. I did all of this on a really, amazing career, scared to death every day that I was going to be found out or wasn't worthy of it. And I'll tell you, professional planners, one of the reasons for that is I didn't have any planning credentials. I hardly do. I mean, I'm a self-taught planner. Um, I majored in history and have a graduate degree in history, and I picked up every bit of it on the job. Um, and also kind of being on juries and selection panels and everything with some very notable architects, planners, and urban designers. So yeah, that's how it came about.
Nice. Okay, we're just like think two more questions. All right.
Mm.
I've been doing a lot of thinking about the different skill sets that are part of our work as planners, but that are less quantifiable, the so-called soft skills. A huge one is empathy, bringing empathy to a shared human experience of doing this and sometimes thankless work. Empathy is powerful in that when we express it, it can counteract the negative feelings of shame that I know we all feel in this work sometimes too. Feeling that we're not doing enough or that we secretly don't have what it takes to do something really hard. So, can you talk a little bit about the role of shame and empathy and what you've learned?
Well, I'm guessing that probably just about every individual who's had a mother and a father, but particularly had a mother, um, has at some point absorbed some degree of shame. It can be a toxic level of that internal punishing yourself all the time. I'm not good enough, and I really screwed up, and all of that. I'm not going to say that's normal. I think it probably is, but overcoming it takes a real effort. It really does. Um, and I was in therapy for 20 years. I was fortunate in having healthcare coverage that made that possible, which many people don't. But I think it really helped me come to grips with a lot of the fears, um, and to also let empathy come out a lot more. Um, I'll never forget early on in the early 70s, um, I was in South Dakota and I was taken to this Southwest South Dakota, and I was standing in this barren, barren place. There's sort of nothing there worth preserving. And yet it was the site of the Wounded Knee Massacre, which is essentially a sacred place, or it is to Native peoples, and it should be to us as well. And at that moment, I just felt overwhelmed with this is not something that would typically be said, this must be preserved, and yet it must. Um, and not only that, but the stories it tells also must be preserved because we need to be able to see our dark side as well as our red, white, and blue side. Um, so that was, I guess that was how I began with the empathy.
All right, I think
And by the way, the writing of the memoir kind of deepened the empathy. I had never really thought about what my mother felt like when the phone call from Dr. Adams came that told her that my brother had what was likely to be a fatal cancer. I'd never thought about what was going through her mind and how when my father came home, she had expected that he would burst into tears with her, and he didn't, and he was very distant. And it was at that point, it's what am I going to do? That the 10-year-old Mary Catherine walks in there. But I just got to thinking about what my mother's life had been like all these years. And it enabled me, as the last piece in the memoir, an epilogue, to forgive her. I'd forgiven her a long while before, but I realized I really need to end this, close this with forgiveness of my mother. Because one of the things I've learned is that forgiveness is not something that you give to the other person. In forgiving them, you loosen the tie they and your guilt has had on you, and you're free of it once you've kind of said, I can understand this and I'm going to move on.
okay, nice. And thank you so much for sharing all these stories of courage, of vulnerability. I guess the last question I have is, what can you tell the rest of us about where you go for strength in times of struggle, whether it's personal setbacks or in our careers, um, and in our work? So where you get your own resilience from?
Oh, well, I guess I need to recharge batteries at moments like that because I can, and certainly the last 14, 15 months, all of us have probably needed to recharge batteries quite often. Um, I do have faith. I am very active in my Unitarian Universalist church. And I believe there's some spirit that guides us in one fashion or another. And it might be internal or up at a cloud or wherever. So that's part of it. But I guess the other is I've tended to be a take action person. Um, so it's like pull your socks up and get back to it. But if you really want to know where I find the greatest relief and have for through COVID and through the terrible politics now, is walking in nature, is just being in the woods, being on a tall grass prairie, which is where I was in Oklahoma. And I can just find such peace there. It's like none of the chatter of everything that's around us makes it through to those places. It just disappears. And my mind could clear.
Thank you so much. So I think I did see a few hands go up. So I don't know if anyone would put any question. Oh, it looks like are there some questions? Looks like it. Okay, let me see here.
Or just jump in.
Okay, let's see. Um, yeah, if anyone wants to raise their hand or unmute themselves and ask the questions themselves. Did you want to ask the questions, Brittany?
Yes, I have to
Okay.
because I just have to.
Okay.
Sorry, I was a preservationist before I turned planner because local politics pushed me out of the field, if you know what I mean. They just made me jaded.
Yeah.
And I'm actually up in Rome, from Atlanta. So.
Oh, Marjorie Taylor Greene's former district.
That's
Right.
one of the reasons I got let go because I was too passionate and empathetic as a preservationist. Yes, I was their historic preservationist for that. Even helped out with the APC Center some. But my whole question with preservation, because you mentioned it earlier with, place sites of conscious, the heavy preservation. Your dad was a purist, the classic cis white male architecture. Woohoo, let's save the cornices.
Yeah.
What do you Before I left Rome, I got the first grant from the National Trust to put our first African American neighborhood on the register. The excuse they always used, the excuse, keep that in mind, was that it wasn't 50 years old yet, even though it had, it from tearing up the neighborhood to churches to slavery, it had legit significance to
Yeah.
like the state of Georgia. They always use that damn 50-year rule.
There's also the category that says of local significance, not
Yes.
just national.
But it was always a fight. And I know that they're finally now have opened it up to more places of conscious, to minorities, you know. Um, what do you think took so long to make that change?
Well,
Why
a
did it
lot of,
take so long?
well, we thought that we were, I think, I don't know about you, I thought we were making great progress over the last 50, 40 years or so. Having grown up in the segregated South,
Hmm.
my high school, my senior year was the first year Atlanta desegregated its public
Oh, wow.
schools. And there were nine very brave Black students who transferred into three white high schools, and mine was one of them. Um, it's like, and then you think Roe v. Wade and all of that, that's taken care of. We're making good gay marriage. And then it's all beginning to come back because there's a certain segment of the population that feels like they have lost everything, they've been left behind. And quite frankly, they tend to be white males. Um, it was a white male who told me I couldn't hire a woman or a gay, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't know. It's just I'm forgetting your question now because I
No,
tend my wife calls it my monkey mind bops around.
you're on track. My question was basically like, they added what was it, Stonewall, and it was only 30 years old up in New York.
Yeah,
But there were so many fights, and it's not just Georgia, to put these places on the register that were under 30 years. And it's like when we tried, it was always a backlog or a lack of funding, or it wasn't significant
yeah,
enough, or the local
yeah.
wasn't significant enough. And when you looked at the underlying Hispanic, gay, lesbian, African, like there was always this what was finally the deciding factor that made them go, wow, we should preserve
I
these places of pain or
I
differences?
don't think it was a wow. I think it was
Oh
just
yeah.
gradually, and it was. things like seeing many more African Americans on television, gay people on television, openly gay, and all of that, a lot more visibility for it, and a lot more speaking up about this heritage is there. Um, and it's going to stay like that. It's not going to be wiped away. Um, I prefer to think that we're going through a period that's probably going to make us stronger for having gone through it. It certainly doesn't feel like that right now. But just think, I could not have imagined the reaction of average people all over the country, all over the world, to the desecration of the White House. That was just, people rallied. They just rallied everywhere with it, and similar kinds of things. I'm optimistic about. I'm not particularly optimistic day by day, living here in the shadow of it. I live in suburban Washington, D.C., so we're dipped in the vat of all of this all the time, and it's hard. It's very hard, but stick with it. You'll always be a preservationist. You just may not be have that in your title, and you may not sort of have it in your, but in your gut, you are. And you, I'm guessing that you approach planning with the kind of framework around it that
Mhm.
says this is an existing place. How can we not make it worse, but how can we make it better
Yep.
without destroying the integrity in it?
The best building is building that's already there.
Yep, yep.
I had one more question before I let the others go, and this is because you're here and I want to record you saying it. And then maybe Linda too, if you're on here. One thing we hear a lot in APA Women in Planning Division, from women just starting out to very accomplished planners in leadership roles, is this feeling of imposter syndrome or wondering whether they truly belong. Based on your experience, does that feeling ever go away, or do you just learn how to navigate it differently?
Um, it doesn't completely go away, but there's like there are two characters in your head, and one of them is that devil that's saying, "Aha, my pretty, they found you out, and they see who you really are." And on the other side is the nonsense. You know that's not true, and here's why it isn't. And after a while, if you are fortunate, the good character there kind of overshadows the other. But it's a very, very common thing. Um, and I think it's also held a lot of very talented people back in not feeling they can speak up or they won't be heard. Um, it really helps to have, I found it helpful to have a whole kitchen cabinet of people that I could turn to when I was feeling like that, particularly when I was working on the Main Street stuff. And the National Trust was very skeptical of the whole Main Street thing. We don't understand it. And they were throwing roadblocks in our path right and left. But to be able to turn to the 5 or 6 people that I had a great deal of respect for, and they had a great deal of respect for me, and get reassurances, not sort of, I'm really feeling like, I'm inadequate for this, but I would take a problem to them that I was trying to cope with, and they would talk through potential solutions. We brainstormed together, and I would walk away. And I realized now I walked away not just with some decent answers, but also with a greater sense of confidence in what we were doing. So I really think having some trusted advisors around is a really good idea to do.
Thank you. And so I'm not sure. I know I saw a hand. I don't know whose hand was up though. Was it Carrie or Christine that had your hand raised?
I
Linda
didn't,
took her
but
mic
I'll
off.
make a
Oh,
comment.
okay. Okay. I thought I saw your hand raised. I'm not sure. Oh, good.
I'll make a comment.
Okay.
I loved the book. I thought the book was amazing. I loved the book. I thought it was amazing. I loved it from cover to cover. What I especially loved was the vulnerability of it and the candor. And I mean, I'll say as a boss, I'm a boss. I hear it from my male employees, imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, I know it's, it's the women chapter, but I have a younger male employee who was actually very vulnerable himself and started to cry one time
Yeah,
during
yeah,
a mentoring session because he felt so much like he had an imposter syndrome. And I mean, my advice to him is just, we're all making this up. We all literally don't know what we're doing.
yeah,
Whether
yeah.
you
That,
have a degree or 20 years of experience, it's like sometimes you just, especially if you work in engagement with people, you can never be an expert in people. And
no,
no, because people come with trauma, with family trauma. People come with, having a fight with their spouse or a fight with their child or you know, uh, illness or just whatever they're dealing with. And you just have to treat them with empathy and understanding and not take it personal. And every day's a brand new day. And it's just really try to be open and communicative and as empathetic as you possibly can and understand that maybe your project is not the most important thing to them that day, but
yeah,
it's,
yeah.
you know,
And I'm guessing that you're listening to that employee and being empathetic with whatever was causing him to cry. Um,
right, right.
did
And
a
that's
lot for,
vulnerable.
that kicked a little demon out of his head right then.
Exactly,
And of course came
exactly.
back, but
Right,
but
right,
he had that episode to refer back to in his subconscious. Wait a minute. She said
right.
some things that were really important. I need to keep them front of mind.
Exactly. But your book very much touched me. I am a parent of three, um, two adults and one teenager um who identify, in the LGBTQIA
Yeah,
family. And
yeah,
it's a different environment today than it was in the 70s and the 80s and the
yeah.
90s, but in lots of ways it's not. And to think of them having to hide their love and having to hide their identity is it's horrible. And it makes me sad to think that for you as well. And especially to have a boss come say to you, don't hire someone like yourself is
Yeah,
really, it's
yeah.
shocking and it's horrific. It's just horrific that you had to carry that with you. It's awful. And to think what you've done for the planning world and what you've done for the preservation world is amazing, all while dealing with that internally is
Well,
amazing.
from having read the book that I actually left the National Trust under really tragic circumstances that
Yes,
just wounded me. I went to ground, if you will. I disappeared
right.
because I didn't have it in me to fight back. I
Yeah,
had been so attacked on a personal and professional level that I owned it for a long time. And I'll tell you, 2020 came with COVID, and I was working on the Main Street book, and I maybe had one more chapter to draft, and it was going to be the last one where we all rode off into the sunset and it's working wonderfully. And then COVID happened. And it's
right,
like, oh shit, I
right,
had no idea. I can't end the book, 6 months ago. I don't know how to say what's next. What do I do? And sort
right.
of in the middle of my watching endless reruns of Grey's Anatomy and vegging out, I got a phone call. Um, and it was from the president of the National Trust. And he told me that they were giving me the Crown and Shield Award, um, which was the highest award. I had a great deal of admiration for many people who had been mentors in my life who had received it. And in a matter of a few days, I'm still grappling with what am I going to do about finishing this book? It dawned on me, if they were here, this chorus of Crown and Shield winners that I so respected, what would they say about the book? And they yelled it at me. They said, we finished the goddamn book.
Right,
It somehow gave me the courage to say, all right, if you've been recognized and awarded by the professional organization that you always felt inadequate to, that profession, and you've now been recognized by the preservation world, then stop beating up on yourself and kind of start to face this. And
right.
it's really been interesting because the last 6 years since the APA Planning Pioneer Award and the Main Street or the National Trust one. I've had a completely different life than I'd had for years before that, because the recognition of this, writing the book and winning awards like that, I think I behave differently, but the world behaves very differently to me. I mean,
Right.
I didn't set out to be on a pedestal at National Main Street conferences, but I basically am. And it's very, I'm feeling so blessed at my age to have the kind of response and the coming to terms with who I've been, all the parts of me, that at a very happy point in my life.
It's amazing.
It will
Well
happen for
deserved.
most of you.
Well deserved.
Thank you. Actually, my big reaction when they told me I'd won the Crown and Shield Award was, um, what I'm most excited about. It meant the National Trust was acknowledging that Main Street was historic preservation, and they really hadn't been doing that. And by the way, back to the how preservation has changed. You may know that Carol Quillen, who has been the president of the National Trust for the last 3 years, is leaving shortly. Her husband has bad health problems, and they have already named Brent Leggs, who's been running the African American Cultural Heritage Fund. They've named Brent the new president and CEO of the National Trust. And I have been so admiring of Brent's ability to tell stories, to relate the buildings, the structures, and everything in it to human beings and their accomplishments and the sadnesses of their lives. I think I mean, if he's able to do it, I think he's got the ability to do it. It could really advance the whole field, being a lot more empathetic and a lot more whole than just the pretty buildings. I got my fingers crossed.
I need you to come, if you haven't done it, or if you have done it, let's do it again, to come some of these state conferences and talk to these new DDA directors, the fresh ones who don't realize that Main Street is preservation.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
they need to be reminded that DDA,
Well,
where they came from.
I've spoken at several state Main Street conferences, and I'm available to do that.
They always seem to forget, the new ones when they come in, they're like, yes, bid district, tear it down,
Yeah,
put something new. I'm like,
yeah,
no.
and they're all just those blue-haired people who like old buildings, and old buildings are an embarrassment to us. We really have shiny new stuff. Still goes on.
There any other?
There's a lot of good stuff in Detroit. You guys that are going to NPC are gonna. I went to school in Michigan, and at Michigan State, they didn't even have a planning department at the time. Uh, but I've been in and out of Detroit for many, many years, and uh, it also was one of the places where I was exposed to the enormous scale of urban renewal and white flight. Um, it was incredibly sad. So let's hope it's coming back soon. I'm not fully, but I think it's doing a lot of things right. And you guys are going to
Yeah,
have to visit them.
there've been definitely a lot of, I would say, revitalization and different, even public spaces that have really improved in the downtown area. So yeah, definitely even in the past, I would say 15 or so years, there's been just a big investment in public spaces. So I think that's really nice, like that you can see, you'll see when you're,
I want to throw out one other thing because you were talking about come to these non-believers and all. The thing that probably most moves me right now about the whole Main Street movement is a small group of Main Street people on the West Coast have started studying and measuring whether having a thriving downtown or a Main Street program helps people feel a sense of belonging more than in communities that don't have this. And they've done some really interesting survey work and focus group. And the answer is yes. It really is something that if people work on something together and it makes them and the community feel prouder of where they're from, and they're more trusting of people in the community because they know them through working on things together, it's vitally important, particularly in the times we're living in. And we didn't set out at the beginning to say, let's do something that keep people belonging in a place. But I don't know if you guys know the work of Mindy Fullilove, Fullilove. Mindy is a social psychiatrist who has studied place and its effect on people socially and psychologically. Probably her most famous book is one called Root Shock, and it's about what happened to the people who are displaced during urban renewal. And it's like if you're a gardener, you know that plants go through a period of really being shocked, and she really documented this. And I think some of these soft skill kinds of dimensions of this work are every bit as important, maybe even more so than the hard nose of how many jobs we've created or buildings redone. And that I'm really proud about.
Interesting. We'll have to look that book up. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, it's a little after 8 o'clock. I guess I'll just ask it one last time if there's any other questions or comments anybody has.
I think we need to do this again if you're interested next year and save it for May, because May is National Historic Preservation Month. So if you have anything new between now and then, it'd be a good topic for it.
And May is when the conference is in Detroit,
Oh, that's right.
the Main Street,
March,
right?
April, May. Oh, yeah, we're almost there.
Yeah.
Well, happy
Yeah.
Historic Preservation Month almost.
Or next year, I should say next year, right? That's next year.
Yep.
Well,
Well,
I want to thank all of you for showing up and paying attention and asking really good questions. As you read the book, those of you who are going to read it or have read it, I would really love to hear from you about what you got from it or how your response to it. Christine, you in particular, I really want to hear from you. You said really nice things. So I'm guessing, I hope the others of you will too. But, oh, by the way, it's out in audio book now. I forgot to tell you that. So those of you who have a lot of driving or running or walking to do, it's perfect for you.
thank you. Thank you for attending today. Thank you for joining us, Mary. And if you're interested in getting more information about WPD or becoming involved, you can visit women.planning.org. And also for more information about Mary Means or to purchase her books, please visit marymeans.com. So www.marymeans.com. Thank you
Thanks,
for
everybody.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you.
Thank
Take
you.
care. Have a wonderful conference.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Take
everybody.
care.
Bye.
Bye.